Hello, I'm Llewellyn King, the co-host of CFS Alert. Thank you for coming along. I have to begin with rather sad news. Deborah Woroff, a longtime sufferer from ME, has died. She was the co-host and co-founder of this program and my close friend for 49 years. I know many in the community will miss her, and of course I will. And without her, we would not have these broadcasts, and I would not have written about CFS in various newspapers as I have. The world is changing. Artificial intelligence is bringing about vast reorganizations in almost everything, and especially medicine. And today we're very lucky to have with us Tang from University of California at San Francisco. Alice is a very brilliant young woman. She has a Ph.D. and is about to get her MD, and she has been looking at how AI can help with various diseases. And welcome, Alice. What do you think the impact of AI will be on disease in general?
So yeah, thank you for the introduction, and sorry to hear about your friend. In terms of AI and its impact in medicine, I think there's a lot of potential. There's, I think, lots of people looking at how AI can be used at multiple areas of the disease process, from preclinical kind of understanding disease mechanisms by analyzing data, all the way to clinical decision support for doctors and healthcare providers, figuring out disease risks early on, all the way to giving insights into disease treatments, and maybe even having more personalized disease treatments. So there's a broad range of how AI is kind of being investigated for use in medicine.
Can we use AI to determine who is likely to get ME and other diseases, but especially ME?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I can imagine a few ways that AI can be applied to ME. First one, since I studied a lot of dementia, and this is quite similar to ME, some of understanding what even is ME and how does it manifest, what does it look like for different patients, it's still not 100% clear that there is that, because there is that heterogeneity. So one application of AI is to say, what does the disease look like? How does it look different? What are some shared characteristics besides fatigue, besides, these difficulties after, say, an activity? What other characteristics might help define ME? And there is one part of AI called unsupervised learning, where we can kind of identify subtypes as one way of characterizing the disease. And I kind of like to think of this like similar to hepatitis, like while it's inflammation of the liver, there's hepatitis A, hepatitis B, there's autoimmune hepatitis, there's alcoholic hepatitis. So maybe it's possible that ME could be subdivided into multiple kind of ways that it manifests, different mechanisms. And that's the first step. Like, what does it look like for different people? And then the second step for AI is, can we maybe predict who is either at risk of AI, either predict when someone currently has AI, so give the diagnosis, or kind of predict a trajectory after, ME, after ME. I misspoke there,
That's fine. And of course, very closely associated with ME nowadays is long-haul COVID, which is the hangover from people who've had COVID. And the symptoms are almost identical. In fact, they sort of overlay each other. That has brought a lot of interest in research. How do you think AI will speed that research up?
Yeah, I think the overlap of symptoms is interesting in many ways, because from the clinical standpoint, it's a question of, are these two distinct disease entities, or is there some type of shared mechanism or overlap, as you mentioned? And I think, one way that this shared symptoms could manifest in AI is kind of defining the patient. So let's say we have these COVID patients, And maybe they say they have long COVID, and we can, again, kind of see like what does the characteristic look like there? And then especially with all this interest in generative AI and large language models, we can also potentially ask these models, can you do you see any patterns among all these patients that kind of indicate that they're one or the other or both? And what are these symptoms or characteristics that are more specific to either ME or long COVID or both? So that's one way where I can imagine that it can help not only with identification, but then we can say like, we can take blood samples from these patients. We can look at some of their lab results and make more characteristics that are more specific to the biology of what's going on in these patients.
One of the advantages of studying long haul is that we know the moment of onset. We know when people have COVID, and after that they have, we don't have any such knowledge of what will trigger or when it will be triggered for myalgic encephalomyelitis. And this is one of the great and extraordinary frustrations. Generally, it does not seem to be a contagious disease, but it has had clusters. And so far, no environmental or social commonality has been found between the clusters. And for example, Incline Village, which is a very rich area in the American West, is very different from the area up in New York State, a very poor hardscrabble area. And then there was an outbreak at the London hospital some years ago. No commonalities at all that can be traced. Do you think long haul, I beg your pardon, do you think AI can look at that sort of thing and find where the trigger might be and why a non-contagious disease would have a cluster?
Yeah. So I think there's different thoughts I have. One is that AI is a tool, but what it can be applied to is the data that we have. And I think, as you mentioned, with COVID, we have a clear trigger, which gives us a nice way to identify patients and then choose what kind of data to follow these patients after. With ME, it's a little more difficult because we don't know where to even start collecting data on patients. But we can try and look, say, like retrospectively with these outbreaks that you mentioned, and see, can we try and combine as much data as possible? If we think there's an environmental factor, if we can look at their electronic health records, if there's some, there's information about their exposures, both broadly as well as their comorbidities or their lab tests, and we can try to look at all of these and see if maybe there is some combined kind of explanation. And I think if AI isn't fully able to take that out, that's partially because of the data as well. And I kind of give parallels to dementia, where, as we're kind of studying dementia, because that is a disease of aging, we don't always have information about, what goes on long before the patient comes with cognitive decline. So I think, especially now as we think about what data is available, and as we have better tools to kind of measure data from the societal level, such as looking at cell phone usage and looking at the epidemiology of COVID, all the way to better ways to sequence people's genetics and look at their blood tests, and also do it over time from their birth all the way to whenever their disease manifests. I think we will get more data that we can look at that can give us insight into ME. And I think that's a positive thing and a potential for AI to take in that data and help give us patterns.
Alice, can you give us some examples of diseases other than chronic fatigue syndrome, myalgic encephalomyelitis, other than that disease, any other diseases where AI has already made a difference?
Yes, that's a good question. I think right now, going back to dementia, since that is what I currently know a lot more about, there is a lot of interest in how we can use AI not only to predict dementia early on, but as we get to the point where we can identify patients with dementia, and both with AI as well as the biomarkers that you might hear in the news, we're able to diagnose people earlier and earlier. And what that means is that we can start choosing these people earlier. We can start measuring their data earlier and then seeing what kind of interventions we could give them. And there's also AI being used in developing drugs to target possible mechanisms leading to dementia. And not only that from the temporal aspect of the disease, but also I think of the heterogeneity of the disease. Because besides Alzheimer's disease, which is one form of dementia, there's other ones too, like vascular dementia, Lewy body dementia. And there's some exciting, I would say, exciting advancements right now looking at how to distinguish these diseases from each other. And people applying AI to not just their health records and their biological data, but also their speech patterns. Can we use speech patterns to determine how their cognition is kind of changing over time to their behaviors? And I imagine something similar could be applied to chronic fatigue syndrome as well, if there's ways we can also characterize these symptoms. Fatigue itself is a very non-specific symptom, but we can try to make that more precise, perhaps. Kind of like the cognitive tests in dementia, such as the mental state exam, the mini mental state exam. Potentially, there could be like a fatigue score or a more objective way of defining fatigue that we can use to kind of first diagnose ME earlier, and then as we get a better, well-defined cohort with objective measures, we can then get better at exploring the heterogeneity in the timeline.
Where are the centers of AI research into medical issues these days? Are they widely spread? Are they at Harvard? Are they at your university? Are they in Texas? Are they in London or Paris? Where are the centers where great progress is being made or hoped for?
Yeah, I would say I think right now it's worldwide, but definitely since I'm at UCSF, there's a lot of conversations about AI and its potential for both the scientific and the aspect and the applications in the clinical realm. And I would say there's a lot of companies around here too, and there's a lot of people thinking about how how to develop companies around applying AI, whether that's with clinical decision support or with note writing. There are some AI scribes nowadays too that are being trialed in the clinical setting. But I would say, especially as AI goes more into medicine, there's also a lot of caution because there's a lot of questions around the accuracy of AI, around the reliability. And when AI is applied to what I would call high stakes applications like human life or death or a human's life based on the decisions, there's a lot more kind of regulation and caution that needs to go into bringing AI into that space. So while there's a lot of potential in discussions, I'd say right now there's also a pathway to figuring out how to best incorporate AI and test it out, similar to like a randomized control trial. If we use it for prediction, let's have a prospective trial where we recruit patients, try it like a drug, and see what the outcomes are. And that I would say that is different than AI applied for consumer applications where, say, like making your face prettier might have less, I would say, life or death type of implications.
That's very interesting. What about drugs? How does AI work in finding off-label uses for drugs that worked on one thing that were never tried on something else, but might be very effective there? You don't always have to develop a new compound. The compound may exist. It's simply that it's not known in a particular use. I think of thalidomide as one. You don't want to give thalidomide to pregnant women because it's disastrous, but it has other very beneficial uses. How is AI used to bring drugs to disease rather than disease going looking for a drug?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I will say that's also really broad in terms of potential applications of AI. There's AI being applied from the drug discovery side where people are either looking at specific genes that are mutated in disease or specific targets and what kind of compounds can reach those targets, all the way to what you might be referring to as, off-label uses of drugs or drug repurposing, where there might not be the time and the money necessarily to run a full trial, but if we know there's shared mechanisms between diseases, there might be potential for that type of inheriting that use for another disease. And in my PhD, my Dr. Sirota, who I worked with, she actually works a lot in drug repurposing, where they look at assays of drugs being applied to cells and looking at their gene expression changes, and using that as a way to kind of compare with the gene expression changes in human disease and seeing what might overlap. And then there's applications all the way to industry, where they are running these clinical trials and they are looking at drugs that might have been already approved or drugs that they have in the pipeline and how they can apply that to patients. And rather than trying to recruit patients, they might start with, say, like you might have heard of simulated clinical trials, where they might take all the data out there, the electronic health record data, the claims data, and try to see, like, if we apply this drug to this simulated population, what are potential outcomes that might exist? And what are potential adverse effects, like things to be cautious about? If we know in one mechanism, one of these drugs, that it causes adverse effects in, say, pregnancy that you brought up, then that might be an important consideration in some of these simulated trials as well. And that can help these companies kind of target more towards kind of defining what is the most impactful trial that they can run and what kind of patients they can recruit that are new and not already existing the data. So I would say that entire pipeline from discovery all the way to clinical trials, there's potential for AI to help with that process.
Alice, ME patients have mostly a life sentence. They don't get better. It drags on year after year. It has ups and downs. Sometimes the patient is bedridden for long periods. Sometimes there are periods of almost normal activity, but often followed by extraordinary relapse, by collapse, by the fatigue, or some of the other symptoms like dysphasia. I wonder, but they also are always seeking something that is helpful to them. One lady found very cold water in lakes was helpful. One young woman I interviewed was getting oils from India, which she found helped her. A lot of people get some comfort from pets and animals, but these are not cures, these are not therapies, but they do help. But one of the things I know is already happening and will be happening on a much wider scale all the time is patients will go to AI and look for themselves. What are the dangers of being a researcher? How can you get the wrong information or deceived by AI because you put in the wrong question?
Yeah, that's a great question. If you've played with, some like ChatGPT yourself, you'll start to realize that AI is I kind of think of it like another person that kind of has their own life experiences, except their life experience is the data that they learn from. So if they learn from the internet, if they learn from certain sources, they will learn what is known in those sources. But they might not know what the sources don't know. And I think a lot of biology isn't fully known yet. So what that might mean is that they might not understand the nuances of what contributes to heterogeneity, that a treatment that works for one person may not work for another person, but it might still bring it up, as all the treatments you mentioned, whether that's oils or pets, or specific drugs like ibuprofen or other painkillers or anything out there. If it works for one person, maybe the AI will mention it. But the dangers of, I would say, AI being applied to the general public is that they might not understand what considerations need to go around these suggestions. I think it would be great for clinicians to see, oh, these are drugs that has worked for others, and we can explore this with the patient. But we also know that the patient is taking say, these 3 other medications, and this oil might, have a negative interaction with these other medications that might not be great for the patient. And that is this type of reasoning that the model may or may not bring up, but if it does not, then that could be a danger for patients.
How much bias is there in medical data in AI? We know there's a bias in data and it affects the consequence of AI. If you ask it to give you a photograph of a doctor, it's more likely to have someone who looks like me than like you, which would be a grave error. How much data, how can you trust the data that the medical data and the therapy data that AI brings up?
Yeah, so what you brought up is a very important point. There is a lot of bias. Again, I think of kind of AI as another person that learns from their experience. And if they learn on doctors that all look like you, then that's their world. And by the time this AI gets applied to a different setting, they might not know how to adapt to that setting. So similarly, as you mentioned, there's a lot of bias in medical data. Like, what is even available medical data? Who goes to places like UCSF? It's probably people who live around the Bay Area, maybe people who live city lives. You get less patients that might live in rural areas or might not have the right insurance coverage or medical literacy to come to UCSF. And of course, because we don't have these patients, we might not learn what these patients' symptoms look like, what drugs work for these patients, or what treatments work, if there's specific animals, specific herbs or oils or something like that. And what that means is that what I think about, like, if we try to apply AI in the future, we have to be considerate of, like, what does the AI train on? Because if I tell you, like, here's a model for you, and this AI is trained on all people that look like me, or Alice's that got ME, then you might question, like, how much can it actually apply to me since I look so different from you? And I think that is a nice consideration to have attached to a model, because if when I'm a doctor one day and I look at this AI output and I see, like, this AI is trained on UCSF patients, but right now I'm in like the middle of Antarctica helping these people who want to come here, then I might have that ability to appreciate that it might not be the most translatable. So I think having that consideration would be helpful when we do get recommendations from AI in the future, to recognize what the bias is and how we want to proceed based on that bias.
Alice, for anybody who is suffering, hope is very important. And I've talked to several hundred ME patients over the years, and they all are still hopeful. They say don't give up hope, although some of them do, and some of them commit suicide, which is a great tragedy in this disease. Does AI introduce a lot of new hope into medicine?
Yeah, I just want to say I always appreciate the resilience of patients, especially when they go through such a devastating lifelong disease. And I do like thinking in hopeful terms as well. I think AI does bring about hope because there's a potential for it to act as another thinking companion on the side. I think, there's many applications, from helping scientists to discover new treatments, to helping run trials that might take a long time, all the way to helping doctors think about what options they can work with the patient on trying. If the patient wants to try, this drug that works for someone, this other one, then they can work together. All the way to even kind of, being a therapeutic companion, where, the way that AI speaks is, might help with some empathy, or help with some kind of like a talking buddy. Like, what do you think? Like, oh, my life is so hard. And sometimes the AI can also help kind of speak as if it's a human, or kind of help a person reflect on themselves. Like,
We don't want to distract you from your research, which is so essential and so exciting. But if people want to get in touch with your laboratory or know more about the work at University of California, San Francisco, where should they go? What is a website we can put up and share with them?
Yeah, so while I don't have a website for myself right now, they can always check out the computational parts of UCSF, like the Baker Computational Health Science Institute, as well as the Computational Precision Health Program at UCSF. These programs kind of look more broadly across multiple diseases, but there might be a potential for them to come over and see if there's ways to do research into ME or chronic fatigue syndrome. I'm not as familiar with the doctors at UCSF that might do research into this as well, but I imagine there might be clinicians who may be interested in hearing more from these patients. And I would say for myself, I'm always happy to, if people want to email me and just talk about their stories. I love hearing people's stories, and I think AI also has a great potential of synthesizing these stories, and the human component I think is always important in research as well.
That's wonderful. You're a very brilliant woman, and we are very grateful you've taken the time from your lab to share some thoughts about AI and its impact on, or its potential impact on ME. I want to tell people that I was very recently visiting a pure AI company, nothing to do with medicine, that have developed what they call agents, which is programs that do things, and much better, much more accessibly than at present. There will be these agents, and you'll be able to talk to them as though you're talking to a friend, the way I'm talking to Alice. Now, that's dangerous, but it also has the potential of bringing a lot of information to people and indeed some comfort. Knowledge can be a comfort, and more knowledge will be available. Alice, again, thank you for your wonderful input today. Until next time, good luck, everybody. Cheers.